doesn't take long or much for society to start to really break down when things like the bins aren't collected, or people aren't buried, or people can't get access to really essential services. How that spills over, I found deeply, deeply disturbing.
Gillian Keegan has had one of the most impressive careers of anyone in politics. A Scouser from a working class family, she started her career as an apprentice in a car factory.
You have to start at the bottom. When I started work, I was 16. I had no views really on politics.
7 years after becoming an MP, she rose to the cabinet. What goes through your brain when the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, calls you in and says, I'm going to take you from your dream job and drop you in healthcare?
I didn't back Boris either. Unless you back Boris, you won't get a job. If we don't fix social care, then it's almost impossible to ever have a functioning NHS.
And then you're made Minister of Africa.
That was a random one, yeah.
And she knows exactly how the system works and how business should interact with politics.
If you want to see mismanagement bordering on and actually did tip into corruption, then in 7 years I literally went from, just starting to being in the cabinet. Now I did discover it in the end, how the machinery of government works, how you get things done. I do hope that the current government doesn't destroy what we've built.
Did you ever think or want to be Prime Minister at all?
It was Boris who said to me when he asked me to. That was the Liz Truss period, and I didn't vote for Liz Truss at all.
What did you say to Liz when...
Oh, have you heard this story?
Make sure you subscribe so we can continue to get bigger and bigger guests. Gillian, welcome to Jimmy's Jobs of the Future.
Thank you for having me.
I remember the first time I heard your voice was in Downing Street, and you were giving your maiden speech, and it was coming out, and it was quite a tough time for the government and for Theresa May in the wake of the 2017 general election. And I remember it being a real kind of ray of hope in terms of what you were talking about, in terms of business needs a better reputation and all these things. And I reread this maiden speech in advance of this, and I remember thinking, this is the future. And 8 years on, you had one of, I would argue, one of the dream kind of political careers of Apprentice, Minister, Skills, and then finally Education Secretary. And then you lost your seat. Mm-hmm. How did it feel losing your seat first?
I was pretty relaxed about it, to be honest, not in the way that, I don't care, but just in a way that it's something you can't control. There's certain times in your life where things you just cannot control everything, and therefore worrying about it is just going to affect you. It's not going to change the outcome. So I remember when I went to the counter, I already knew I had lost the seat. The seat had changed massively in boundary changes, so it was hard to judge. It had really gone through quite a lot of change. So it was hard to judge beforehand, but I knew before I went. So by the time I went, I always used to write a losing and a winning speech. I only took the losing speech because I knew that was going to be the only one I'd need. And I was actually probably the most sort of joyful person there, because everybody else either looked shell-shocked or were actually in tears. Yeah. And I'm a very pragmatic person. I mean, I look at it and think, who on earth, if somebody had have asked you when you were growing up in Knowsley, aged, 14, 15, 16, do you think one day you could be Education Secretary? I would have not known where that had come from. I would have thought, absolutely not. So, when things have just exceeded your expectations in life, I felt extremely grateful to be able to have done it. And then, you move on to the next thing, which, we'll see what that is.
And of course, I think that's one of the reasons why you're perhaps more sort of relaxed than quite a lot of politicians, in terms of you had a proper career beforehand and a proper kind of hinterland. Can you talk us through a little bit of the business career? And there's a couple of moments that I'm particularly interested in, but the car apprenticeship is one at General Motors and so on, and you talked about that quite a few times, etc. But then the sort of the move to NatWest is an interesting one. What happened there? Was there a bit of a sliding doors moment?
Yeah, well, first of all, the car apprenticeship. So you mentioned my maiden speech. I am in my DNA just so pro-business. And the reason I'm pro-business is because the school I went to wasn't really very good. And the business I started at age 16 changed my life. So that's why I'm a huge fan of apprenticeships, high-level apprenticeships, degree apprenticeships, because sometimes, whilst we've worked very hard to get the school standards up, and they're a lot better than when I was at school, sometimes, for whatever reason, you need your opportunity later in life. And I have found all the way through my career businesses to be hugely supportive of training, of allowing you to get more experience, of allowing you to get broader experience, etc., allowing you to take on new things and, really build up your confidence. So my apprenticeship I loved. I did 7 years in the car factory. And what happened in the apprenticeship, it was a rotational degree level apprenticeship. It became, they said they'd sponsor you up to degree, but it didn't have to be degree. In fact, I was the only one who did go up to degree. And you learned all about all the jobs in the car factory. So you're here on this podcast trying to tell people about the thousands of jobs that none of us have heard of that exist in businesses. Well, when you're doing that kind of apprenticeship, you just see what's available at that time. All the ones you think, I could see myself doing that, or I don't fancy doing that, or I don't think I want to do that, etc. So that was just brilliant, a brilliant grounding. As a result of that, I ended up going into procurement, which was quite a tough job because it was making sure that you got all the car parts to make the pieces they were making that day, but they had to arrive just in time, not too early and not too late, because you didn't want to tie up your working capital. So there was lots of changes in the car factory. So it was actually a very stressful job. And I used that, and this is about lateral moves, I used that procurement role and expertise to move into procurement in banking. And at the time, banking was going through huge changes in technology, PCs, and the banks were being upgraded really in terms of, automated in many ways. So I bought all the automation, all the points of sale that you see now that accept all the card machines. I worked on digital payments. I worked on the chip and pin before that existed. I worked on all the new technologies, and I worked on buying those technologies, even buying technologies that didn't exist. So basically joint investing with various companies in Japan. So it was a fascinating journey, and I absolutely loved it. And I learned a lot.
And then you go to, if I'm getting this right, MasterCard as commercial kind of director of a specific division. So that, again, another sort of lateral move from procurement then to a bit more sales.
Yes, that was taking me into the direction of sales. And MasterCard actually bought the last thing I was working on in the bank, which was digital payments, which was a collaboration with about 40 other banks globally to try and take the banking industry to where they are today with chip and pin when they didn't have anything. So that was something we did. And obviously MasterCard were quite a good home for that. So that ended up, all that technology ended up being bought by MasterCard. So I went with it. And I'd spent a fair bit of time trying to work with mobile phone operators and hardware providers to try and get payment systems accepted in mobile phones, all the things we have today.
Yeah.
In the 90s, we were working on all of that. The vision was there, but sometimes with technology, it takes a while to implement it and certainly to get it ubiquitously adopted by consumers, which is where you need to work with like hardware manufacturers, etc. So I did that, went with MasterCard, and then that was commercial director. So that's when you're more investing in something that you're going to buy later. So it's a joint investment. You'll own some of the intellectual property rights, etc. That's what it was in my case. And that was my route on the way to sales. And they're really just two sides, the opposite sides of the table, right? Procurement and sales. And that's where I then ended up moving to Madrid in a sales role for Amadeus.
And at what stage did you do the Sloan Fellowship at London Business School?
After my 8 years in Madrid. So I came back at the end of 2009. I'd gone in 2001. I was only supposed to go for a couple of years because my husband didn't move with me. So I thought I'd go for a couple of years and get that experience. I didn't ever want to be somebody who'd never tried to learn a second language or live abroad. It was always in my goals to do that, life goals. So I was supposed to go for 2 years. I went for 8. Or just under 8. And when I came back, the company was going to be IPOing a couple of months later. I had equity that was vested. So I couldn't actually work for anybody else until that had all happened. So I thought, you know what? I'd always wanted to go back and study because I'd only ever studied part-time. So I'd done a degree, but I'd done it going 1 day a week on a Friday and a Tuesday or Wednesday evening. So I'd never really had the experience of going full-time. So age 42, I decided I would go back and do the Sloan Fellowship, which is like an MBA, but for people who've got a lot more business experience by then. So you've done lots of business cases, you've done lots of business deals, you've worked in business for normally 10 to 15 years at that point, and you're looking to get to the next stage. So sort of strategy and leadership is the huge focus, as well as all the other things you learn on an MBA.
And what did you learn about strategy and leadership on that? Because they can be quite nebulous topics, right?
I mean, literally, it's all about people. So, the goal is when you get up in the morning and when all the people who work for you get up in the morning, what is it that's going to make them leap out of bed and feel excited about the day ahead? They know what they're doing, they're comfortable with their work colleagues, they're excited about what they're doing, they feel real purpose about what they're doing, they understand their role in it. They understand if they don't, they can ask somebody and it's no big deal. So it's really about trying to motivate people to be the very best they can in their roles. Now, of course, people always have certain insecurities. They'll always have things that they don't know. I mean, none of us know everything. Most of us don't know, even a tiny amount of things. So it's really about trying to create that right environment and how you, inspire people to follow you. I guess that's the real definition of leadership, that somebody's following you. Now, I've always done it in a way by being very open. I'm a very natural person. I'm from Liverpool. Everyone knows I'm from Liverpool. I haven't lost that kind of chatty nature and that sort of open style. People do it in different ways, but that's kind of the way that I do it. And, I always stay in touch with people. I think that's another thing. The best time to get in touch with somebody is when something's not going right for them. So if you've lost your seat as an MP, if you've lost your job, if something's not going well in your personal life or something, you're feeling down. And all of us will get this at some point in our life. You can't go through the whole of life and something not impact you in that way. That's the time, the most important thing, to reach out and to be there for people. People really remember that, and you get a kind of respect from doing that.
I totally agree with that. It was a piece of advice I was given as the number 10 business spad was by Dan Korski, who did the job under Cameron before me, said, when other spads go through a rough time, you're in a privileged position in businesses, make sure you reach out to them and offer them a hand. And it's always kind of like stuck with me, given the general maelstrom of 2016, 2019. I'm not sure I always managed it, but it is true how it sticks with people. What do you text people in that situation? Because sometimes it can be a bit difficult to know what to say.
Just reaching out to let you know I'm here. Anything I can do to help? Or do you fancy a coffee? Just talk about it.
Yeah.
Or, let me know when you're around. I'm always here at the end of a phone. Just something like that. A coffee is always a great thing to do, right? It's just sitting down, having a coffee. People like to get out and, have a tea or a coffee or a drink at the end of the day if it's that. But I think it's just having someone to talk to, because actually sometimes you feel when things happen like that, you think, oh God, this is the end of there'll be a lot of my colleagues, MPs. It was a bit different for me. I was 49 when I got elected. I was 56 when I lost my seat. I'm 57 now. And I'd worked for 40 years before. So my equation's my equation. But for a lot of people, they're not in that position. They're much younger. They've got families. They've got bills. It's a much, much more difficult situation. And now they need to find other jobs. So, reaching out at that point is really, really important, because everything's changed overnight. It's not normally as brutal in business as it is in politics. Politics is incredibly brutal.
Yeah.
It's all or nothing in some ways. Business, it isn't quite like that, but still, I think people appreciate that. Being there when you're down is probably easier from being there when someone's on the way up.
How can we persuade more experienced people to go into politics, and in particular more business people?
Well, that's how I actually ended up in politics. So I say to people I wasn't particularly political. Now, by that, I was a Conservative in Liverpool, which is unusual. So I had come to my own view. I was political enough to be watching politics, to be thinking about who I would vote for, and to come from a different view from almost everybody around me. So I was political enough for that, but I'd never thought of going into politics. And actually what happened is this organisation that you've probably heard of called Women to Win, which was set up by Theresa May and Baroness Anne Jenkin. They go around basically looking for particular people, not individuals, but to try and spot people who, more women, for example, because we've only got 24% women now in Conservative MPs. It went back a little bit at the last election, obviously people like myself losing. And then they also wanted to get more businesswomen. And I met them quite randomly at the theatre, literally at the theatre, with somebody that we knew from the Japanese corporate world. It's quite a random meeting. I never underestimate the power of randomness. That's really what you mean by networking. You know, you never know who, if you're out and about and meeting people, you never know who you may meet and where it will lead. And it's actually one of the most powerful things for finding a job, particularly when you're not looking. And this person, Baroness Anne Jenkins, said, have you ever thought of being an MP? And I said, no, not really. But the fact I was a businesswoman, I was a woman. They were looking for more women and more people with a business background. The fact I was from Liverpool was a bonus because there's not that many Liverpool Conservatives. And then I started, but you have to start at the bottom. So this is the other thing. If you're in business, and by that point, I was in executive positions, at the big office. I flew at the front of the plane. You know, I had the chair that swung round with the 360 views. Yeah. So and then, you know, on this journey, you know, a few months later or a year later, I was a district councillor on £5,000 a year, you know, so going out and finding out, you know, what people's issues were locally. So you've got to be able to, yourself, your ego needs to be able to go through that. Now, I find that quite easy, but I also find it very rejuvenating because it is completely different. You're throwing yourself, in a way, into the unknown. But I was always confident that if I did and if I worked hard at it, that I'd be given a shot because I felt as though they were, you know, trying to help train us. They were trying to help us be able to give speeches. And it's a different kind of speech, political speech. So I could give presentations to hundreds of thousands of people in a stage in Las Vegas or at a conference center or whatever. But it's different than talking about yourself and selling you. So it's a different kind of speech. So you have to basically get yourself up to speed to be able to do that in a very natural way, which is hard.
What do you wish you'd known when you first entered politics?
I guess a little bit more about how the mechanisms work, which is the advantage of people who've been special advisors, for example. So I came with a very strong set of things that I knew in terms of business, how business works, the economy. I also came from Knowsley, so I understood very much, you know, people who are struggling in life and that kind of journey. I understood the lack of opportunity in certain parts of our country because, again, I'd lived through that. But I didn't understand what a special advisor would know, which is how the machinery of government works, how you get things done. How you know how the Whip's office works, how the Treasury works, the most important department really, how you get things through the Treasury. Now I did discover it in the end. I did work out the secret source of what kind of business case gets through the Treasury.
And how does that business case differ to a traditional business case in a business?
Because I guess what they have is in business, in business you're looking at, you know, the opportunities, and you look at the opportunity cost of choosing opportunity A, whether it's a country you're investing in, it's a business you're buying, a product you're developing, and you will be able to have an analysis. It's a very financial analysis. And of course, you've got inputs that are unknowns, your competition, what they'll do, but you've got some idea and, you know, whether you think you can really get a big market share or be successful in this business. And then you sort of take your punt. In the Treasury, they will have bids from everything from, you know, I mean, we've got immigration today. So, you know, if you really want to solve immigration, then could you link that to investing more in some of the areas that are low paid, that mean people don't want to go into them, for example? So you'd have a joined up, coherent strategy. First of all, the departments don't join up. So you've got to pick through the bones. And secondly, there's hundreds of them and they're all so very different. It's like choosing from every industry, every product, you know, it's not just within a sector. So that's what makes it more difficult. Plus, fundamentally, what really makes it more difficult at the moment is we've borrowed a lot for the financial crash, for COVID. You know, you can't borrow that again. Our deficit's really high. It's costing a fortune. That's why we're so jittery about things that impact the bond markets, for example, because that puts government borrowing up, and a little tiny amount will put it up a lot. So the other side of it is they haven't actually got a lot to play with either. And what is typical, and this is common to both government and business, is stopping doing things is the most difficult thing. What do you stop doing? What do you say I'm not going to do? And how do you remove the cost so that you can invest it in the future? It's difficult for businesses to do that because by that time you're invested with whatever revenue you get in. People have got knowledge about that particular business area. Everybody always thinks it's going to have a future, even if you can see basically it won't in 10 years' time. But, it involves people. So change management is difficult. And change management is really about trying to change people's minds, which is always difficult.
You said something earlier about there not being that many Conservatives who are Liverpudlians, but there is a sort of striking argument of the opposite of that, of like Nadine Dorris, Kit Malthouse, Therese Coffey, Gillian Keegan. Like, why are so many Conservative Scousers, or why are so many Scousers Conservative?
Well, first of all, the voting of the whole city doesn't show that for the normal people. But in terms of look at MPs, there are quite a lot of prominent Scousers who have come forward as Conservative MPs. And I think we all went through probably a very similar experience at a very similar time. So when I started work, I was 16, I was in a car factory. I had no views really on politics. I had no views really on unions or anything like that. And then I'm working in a car factory. It's competing with lots of car factories all over the world. It was a sub-assembly factory. And the unions didn't want to change to new working practices to compete with the, just in time, which has been introduced all over the world. It started in Japan. And they basically went on strike after strike, as though that was going to be the answer. And you could see what was going to be the answer, that actually the next time there was a model change, when the whole capital investment cycle started again, they wouldn't invest in Kirby. They would invest somewhere else. So I saw that personally. I don't think the others worked in car factories, but they'll have seen the impact on jobs in the city. And now other people could have a view, oh, well, we should have given in to the unions' demands and the jobs would have stayed. That is absolutely not the case. And I know because I was working inside that car factory. The second thing is Liverpool City Council and Derek Hatton. So if you want to see mismanagement bordering on and actually did tip into corruption, then Liverpool City Council is a fantastic example of that. And if you want to see the impact, we see this in Birmingham now, the impact on real people's lives, it doesn't take long or much for society to start to really break down when things like the bins aren't collected or people aren't buried or people can't get access to really essential services. Now, obviously, we've all suffered quite a lot through post-COVID where, it's certain that the services are not back to where they were pre-COVID. But, and even then, there was pressure on the services that we need, mental health. I was mental health minister at one point. You didn't talk about mental health 10 years ago. And now we're trying to, get many more people working in mental health. But that obviously takes a lot of time. And if you come from Liverpool and you lived those experiences and you looked at the Labour answer and you looked at the Conservative answer, I think all of us came to the same conclusion, that the Conservative answer was a better fit.
Yeah. Are you a fan of Jimmy's Jobs of the Future? Hi, I'm Sonny, one of the producers behind the show. And we don't just make this podcast, we produce some of the best business content out there, working with global brands and founders. Over the past year, we've flown around the world and demand keeps growing. And with 4 Prime Ministers trusting us with their appearances on this show, you're in safe hands. So, if you're already in the market for a podcast or standout business content, why not start with us? Drop me a line at sunny@boxlight.io, try our podcast calculator, or book a meeting at boxlight.io. That's boxlight.io. Now, back to Jimmy.
But how was it growing up? Because you're a coal mining family as well, right?
Yeah.
So, and in Liverpool, it is not the stereotypical Conservative by any stretch of the imagination. Just what was that like?
Well, first of all, I grew up in. We spent 5 years in Yorkshire, actually in a coal mining village as well. But then we came back to Knowsley when I was 10, and I mean, all my family was there. I'm from a massive family. My dad's one of 13, 11 survived to adulthood. And they all lived within a couple of streets of one another. So actually, I had a fantastic childhood because I always had cousins at school. I always had friends that were, cousins as well. They were, very close in age. I had both sets of grandparents. I grew up with great grandparents even alive, so I was very lucky. And, one of my granddads was a coal miner. And, I do remember the coal miners' strike. I remember it in Yorkshire when I was young. I was very young, 4 or 5 at the time. But I was going to school. I just started school. And kids, parents or dads were in those coal mines. So it was a massive, topic of discussion. So I definitely learned. I didn't know anything about that, but I was very scared. And I suppose I understood the importance of having a job from a very young age. If you had a job, you could have, a better lifestyle than if you didn't have a job. I suppose that was ingrained. And my grandparents always used to say to me, particularly my grandmother who had the 13 children, she used to say, benefits are not for you, benefits are for other people. Your part of this equation is for you to pay into the system. You're the one who has to be paying taxes into the system because, and she'd point to somebody in the street who, had some real problems and would be judged to be incapable of working. It's for Mr. XYZ, and then she'd send me a dinner to go up to Mr. XYZ because she would feed half the street as well. So I guess all of those things were ingrained in me as a child without me even knowing.
Let's talk about one of the things that you are most associated with, which is degree apprenticeships, because I think this is a really exciting development that's particularly I know they've always existed, but they are kind of on rocket boosters in the last 5-10 years, partly by some of the reforms that you've kind of brought as well. Which ones do you think are particularly interesting? Which firms are doing degree apprenticeships? Well,
when I first became the Apprenticeships and Skills Minister, I'd been sold on degree apprenticeships ever since I'd done one years before. And you were right, they did exist, but they were not widely available. So they were usually in particular professions, and they were usually large multinational companies. So General Motors, they had a program. There'd be Ford's would have had a program. Large international businesses probably would have had a program. Some of the civil servants maybe would have had a program. Potentially some construction industry, you could have gone up to maybe quantity surveyor level. They would have had a program, but that was it. And what I wanted to do was, first of all, to put them on the map and to basically to make sure they were available in pretty much every profession. So we worked with all the NHS trusts. We worked with 5,000 businesses to develop all the apprenticeship standards up to those higher level. And it's not just degree, because level 4 and level 5, which is like HNC, HND level, they actually earn normally as much as the degree level because they're usually quite technical. So I thought, actually, one of the biggest challenges I have here is not that they're good, not that their companies don't want them, they do. And we can work with the universities who also were getting more open to being more flexible to be able to, sort of work out a degree structure with the businesses. But it's the parents. It's actually the parents that you need to convince, because everybody feels that their child almost is on a conveyor belt now to university. It's more than 50% of young people, around 50%, end up going. So I thought, if you're going to convince parents, what is it you do? So I got in the big four, sort of PwC, Deloitte, all of those, Morgan Stanley, the brands that everybody would want their kids to work for, that everybody understands, And I got a whole load of different businesses in and said, what's the opportunities for degree apprenticeship? So we have financial analysts, we have data analysts, we have lawyers now, we have accountants where you can skip that sort of sequential, do a degree, then do your professional accountancy exams and do them as a combined course with, any of the big four, KPMG, PwC, Ernst & Young, etc., any of them. So that is what we did to really change the perception of them. And I think it's really worked. And people now say to me, in fact, I think it was Boris who said to me when he asked me to move from the Apprenticeships and Skills Minister role, which I loved. I mean, it was a perfect job for me. and to the social care and mental health, which was a promotion. But he said to me, your work is done. I was at a dinner party and 3 people were mentioning degree apprenticeships. Your work is done here. People know about these opportunities now. I do hope that the current government doesn't destroy what we've built. They are taking an axe to some of it, but they're more at the master's level, which, there's only 2 really. They're mostly the NHS going up to masters in clinical sort of specialisms. But I get the impression that, first of all, they're not as passionate about them perhaps as we were, but also they don't understand business as much as perhaps someone like I did. So really understand that when you talk about skills, instead of trying to develop them in isolation, if you have the businesses and the DFE and the universities and colleges working jointly, and that's what was done under IFATE, which they've also got rid of, then that is actually the holy grail, to try and get the system to work together and be responsive enough to the future needs of businesses and make sure that the things joined up. And that was our attempt at. It wasn't working perfectly, but it was definitely on the journey to being a system that actually many people around the world really admired.
Yeah, and that ability to earn and learn at the same time is
vital. For me, I didn't have the option. I would never have had the confidence in myself at that age to think that I could have gone and got a degree. I wouldn't have had that confidence. And many people, I think, from working class backgrounds, more go to university now than they ever have. But still, many will worry about that sort of debt and their ability to get jobs that would pay it off in the future.
Yeah, hugely, right?
They don't know anyone who has. So that's part of what you worry about.
Very impressed when you were describing your business career at the kind of like lateral moves that you made. I know sometimes these things are a bit easier to join the dots in hindsight. But what goes through your brain when the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, calls you in and says, I'm going to take you from your dream job and drop you in healthcare? Like, what process kind of goes through with that in terms of, to a lot of people in the outside world, that will not make any sense?
Well, I think the same process, you have the same initial thought that you have with any job, which is, can I do it? Why me? Can I do this? And I think, it's unusual that you would, the ministerial jobs are obviously very different. And of course, the organisations that are supporting you are not changing jobs. So the civil servants are not changing jobs. So it's just the person at the top, which is part of the problem. This rapid movement of people in ministerial ranks is part of the problem, really. You don't get to know it enough to be able to be effective. But when I was asked to do that move, we were at that time going to reform social care. So we'd introduced a levy. We were going to reform social care, which I am a strong believer in, because my grandmother, one of my grandmothers, both of them got dementia. But one of them had to sell her house to pay for her care. And her house was a 3-bed council house that she'd bought under the Margaret Thatcher right to buy. And I don't think most people in the country understand today that if you get dementia and you have to go into a care home, you will have to pay, using your assets down to your last 20 grand or whatever it is. I think it's 23,500. Or in certain circumstances goes even below that. So I don't think people understand it. And it just strikes me as terribly unfair, because if your sort of journey at the end involves cancer, then the state picks up the cost. If it involves dementia, you pick up the cost yourself. And that is what Theresa May tried to solve that. You remember that probably. Boris tried to solve it. So when he explained to me that he thought I would be good at selling this policy and be able to, put the reforms in place, because what you're doing is, first of all, you're trying to explain to the public why it's worth spending a bit more collectively to take us all off that hook. And secondly, then you need to work with all of the stakeholders. And it is a sales job to some degree, as well as a technical sort of reform job. And he said, I think you could do that. So you have to get yourself then up to the point where you believe that you can. And that's the same as you always do. You go start a new job, spend the first 3 months asking every question under the sun, read everything. And you can never be dumb in the first 3 months, right? That still applies everywhere. Maybe it's a bit less in ministerial terms,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah.
And certainly I don't think the morning breakfast TV presenters give you quite as much leeway as that. But in general, when you start something new, nobody expects that you're going to know it all. So I did actually enjoy that job a lot more. And then, of course, mental health, because of the pandemic, this was the second half of the pandemic, became a much, much, much more concerning thing, because many more people's mental health suffered during the pandemic through that isolation, through that uncertainty, through not knowing, through their whole routine and structures being upended. And that's something that will take us time still to recover from.
Yeah, well, as Tony Blair made the point on this podcast, spending a lot more money on it than we were.
Yeah.
And then you're made Minister of Africa.
That was a random one, yeah. 7 weeks. Actually, I love Africa, and I've done quite a lot of business travel in Africa.
Okay.
And I don't think that's why I was given that role. But that was the Liz Truss period, and I didn't vote for Liz Truss at all.
What did you say to Liz when?
Oh, have you heard this story? She asked me whether I'd back her, and I said no, Liz. And she tried to say, woman to woman thing, and I said no. And she said, why? And I said, because you're crackers. And I thought, and I meant it, and I didn't mean it unfairly, but I said to her, it's just one step too far. I said, I wouldn't think I could be Prime Minister. I wouldn't sit there and say I could be Prime Minister.
Yeah.
It's a big job and it's a big role, and you've got to have the temperament. And, listening skills are massively important in any job you do. But certainly, in that job, listening to the markets, listening to other people. And I didn't see a great deal of listening skills, to be honest. Quite a lot of assertiveness, but not much listening skills.
But you were quite rare in the sense of you were given a job having not backed her.
Yes, I think there was about 3 or 4 of us. I never, I used to have people say to me, unless you back, I didn't back Boris either, unless you back Boris, you won't get a job. And I used to say, I've had loads of jobs. I've literally been working since I was 16. In fact, I was working since I was 13 in St. John's Market as a Saturday girl. So I've literally had loads of jobs. I'm not going to do what I think is the wrong thing just because of getting on the ministerial ladder. I've by that time I was 49, 50. So, you don't have quite the same. You've proven yourself more to yourself a little bit, I guess, than having, I've never really had a big important job, and that ministerial job is really going to be it for me. That's going to be my first big rung on the ladder, or second big rung on the ladder. So I was in a different position, I think, than most. But I still probably would say, I'm quite forthright, so I probably would say the same. Anyway, so I did get a job. I still haven't worked out how, but it was Minister for Africa. And I was very excited because I love Africa. It's also super strategic in geopolitical sense. The Russia and Chinese strategies are being played out there on a daily basis. You've got critical minerals, you've got shipping routes, you've got all other transportation hooks that are being purchased and invested in all across Africa. And I think I'm right if the figure's right, but something like in 10 or so years' time, the quarter of the young population will be African. But even if that figure's not right, the sentiment is right. Yeah, most young people will come from Africa in the future because their birth rate hasn't stopped and it's stalling in many, many other parts of the world. So it is super strategic. So I only did 7 weeks, but I read such a lot and I really enjoyed it. And I did one ministerial visit before I was moved, although when I was moved, I was promoted to the cabinet, so I can't really complain.
That's quite good. Where do you think you get your kind of, and we'll come back to that, but where do you think you get your kind of like innate curiosity from?
I am very curious. Right now I'm looking at trying to do looking at courses into AI and ethics and things like, I went back to study at 42 and I'll probably go back at, I don't know, maybe late 50s to do something. Probably a short course. I won't go and do a long course again. But I am very curious because I don't know where it comes from. I think it probably is in your DNA to some degree, but I've always been very curious. How does this work? Why is that doing that? Why is a great question. And I suppose it makes things more interesting. I've always also liked variety.
Yeah.
I don't like to do one thing all the time, which is why the MP role, even though I never thought of it myself, even though it was something someone suggested to me, when it came to actually doing it, I loved it because I loved the constituency part, but I even loved the morning round, even though I didn't love it. I felt a sense of achievement for doing it. So I would say yes to everything. I would say yes to that's why I was on the media a lot, particularly during COVID, when a lot of people were smarter than me maybe than said no. But I am curious, and because we only have a short time here in the world, right? Why not be?
Yeah. No, I completely agree. So time as Education Secretary, probably the dream job, I imagine?
Yes, it was. And I knew the department pretty well because I'd spent almost 2 years as the Apprenticeship and Skills Minister before being moved to Health. And actually, when I started that job, 3 weeks later was when the pandemic hit. So it was a very intense period. But, obviously you learn a lot. And then going back to education, it was all the same people.
Yeah.
And it's the first and only time I've been able to go back and say, that thing that I asked you to do, did you do it? And thankfully, because you're always a bit suspicious that they just wait for the minister to move on and then put, that one's in the bottom drawer. But thankfully, all the things that I had been working on, particularly with apprenticeships and skills, trying to get the completion rates up because there's something going wrong there, all the things that were going to improve the system, they were working on and they had continued to work on. So that was good to see. And then just having a broader remit. So then obviously you've got the school standards, but I had Nick Gibb, who is literally the king of school standards. Actually now globally he's going around advising people.
You had a real rock star ministerial team.
I did.
Rob Halfon, who knows more about skills than probably anyone else on the planet, I would say. And then Damien Hyde, who'd been a former education secretary as well, and Claire Coutinho as well.
Yes.
When I looked at it earlier, I was like, that's quite...
Yes. Well, when Rishi asked me to be cabinet minister, which I wasn't expecting, and this is proof, I'm sure everyone says that, but the proof I wasn't expecting is because I had not washed my hair. And I would definitely have washed my hair if I thought I was going to be doing that walk down Downing Street, just for the neighbours and my mum and dad back home. But I hadn't, because I thought maybe I'd get back up to a Minister of State, because I had been demoted. The African minister was actually a demotion, even though it didn't really feel like it. But I, as you get that sort of cabinet minister, the first thing I said, which is so me, is, how am I going to be able to do it? Will I be good enough? And I said, I need a really good team. Now, I don't know if anyone remembers, but there had been times when there hadn't been that good a team. Yeah. Certainly there were some ministers who were not that great. Prior to that, so I was thinking, I really do need a good team, and Rishi said, "Don't worry, I'll give you a good team." And I kind of hinted at some of the people that I thought might be really excellent in these positions, but I didn't obviously say the names because it is the Prime Minister's decision. But let's just say I was delighted with the team. They were an amazing team. Yeah.
But it is funny, isn't it? Because you are basically becoming the sort of chief executive of the education department. You don't really get a say over any appointments on the ministerial side or the civil service side. I mean, that is one of the big differences between politics and business, right?
Hugely different. So in business, within your team, and as you get more senior, obviously that grows, and maybe even the CEO of the whole company, you get to normally hiring decisions, firing decisions if somebody's underperforming. Promotion decisions, bonus decisions, all the levers that you have to incentivize and motivate performance. Or indeed, sometimes you do have to, manage out poor performance, because keeping poor performance actually brings everybody else down, because everybody sees it and everybody notices it. So, that's one of the things you really learn, when you've been in many leadership positions, that it isn't kind to do that to the rest of the team.
Yeah.
But doing all of those, they're all within your gift as a leader. In these roles, they're not. As you say, the civil service is its own complete organisation. And yes, okay, there have been occasions where some people have managed to, get rid of a civil servant or whatever, but it never ends well. And it's also not within the usual sort of role that you have. Likewise, you don't choose the ministers. So, if a minister decides, they don't want to really do the job or listen to what you say or have very different ideas, you've got to use your persuasive skills. So the skills you use in politics are very much more around persuasion and trying to gain the respect of your colleagues. And it's also more of a flat structure.
Yeah.
Everyone in politics gets one vote. which is ultimately what happens with, in getting legislation through. And going up or going down can switch. You can be Education Secretary one day and a backbencher the next day.
Yes.
You can be Prime Minister one day, Rishi Sunak, and backbencher now. So these things, it's those hierarchical changes do not happen in the business world.
It's real snakes and ladders politics
Yes.
in that kind
Yes.
of sense of things. So I asked a few teachers for questions and various things. And the one that came up again and again, and I hadn't sort of appreciated this, is just how many teachers are kind of leaving the profession at the moment. And it's almost up at sort of 10% in the last couple of years, right? And the Department for Education figures. Why do you think that is, and how do we stop that?
So I think we had two key issues in terms of the workforce. One was trying to make sure we attracted enough people in to the profession. And so
which is always a sort of obvious one, right?
And then the other was the retention. So we had a retention strategy. And the reason we looked at when people were leaving. So first of all, there was a spike in year 3 or 4.
Yeah.
So they just started, they'd got into the profession, or even 2 or 3, and thought, my God, this is so different than the classroom version, where I did a placement, but, this environment is so different. I don't think I can do it. And they would leave. So that was one. And then the other is early retirement, taking retirement a little bit earlier. And, often that's because it's not just teaching. People have sort of readjusted their lives now post-COVID and thought, I don't want to be working full time. So there's a couple of things we were trying to do. One is to use AI and other tools actually to make the workload a little less repetitive. So there is a lot that you could do on the workload to make the workload easier, so that you're doing what you think is the fun bit of teaching, which is actually teaching the kids, as opposed to a lot of the stuff behind the scenes. And also a lot of that stuff behind the scenes takes up a lot of your weekend if you're working full time. So that was part of it as well. The workload had just become too much. Sometimes behaviour in the schools as well is impacted. I mean, teaching friends who I know, one of them has left because, she was attacked in school. Well, no one's going to put up with that kind of stuff. So that's the behaviour, and that's why we put a lot of focus on behaviour hubs, etc. Because without behaviour, you can't do anything on standards, and it certainly doesn't help the teachers feel valued and comfortable and enjoyment in their work environment. And then the other thing was flexibility. The thing that's happened in lots of other professions is flexibility. So, there's more working from home, there's more flexibility in terms of how you do your hours, how many hours you do. Teaching is still relatively inflexible. So it was to try and enable those job shares. So we had a number of sort of schemes to try and enable that, to get, part-time teachers to be able to do, 3 days a week, maybe with their prep time, that would be 4, and maybe that suits a lot. And that could keep people in the profession who just don't want to spend all week, all day, every day, plus a day of their weekend, working when they're in their 50s and maybe could take their pension a bit early. So that is another factor as well. So all of those were part of the retention strategy. Some of it happens in other professions as well. There are other professions where you see some of that. But I think it's certainly something that you just need to continuously work on, because there are so many teachers who have such brilliant experience, and that's the problem. You're losing a lot of experience.
It's very interesting. This Charlie Colnut book, which I might give you afterwards, is interesting on the amount of bureaucracy and shadow work there is, like right across the UK. So he's basically done the opposite of Jimmy's Jobs of the Future. He's gone and spoke to 70 people about their jobs today and what it involves. And there's a story in there about a soldier who retrains as a teacher and says he finds teaching more stressful than being a soldier, which is like striking on any level. But it is also just generally across the board the amount of shadow work and bureaucracy in it. There's a construction site manager in there that's saying it's impossible for me to have a site on impossible for me to have a conversation on site without having to then go and put it in an email.
Yes, that is definitely probably a change in a lot of working environments where people do feel they need to write things down so that things are recorded. And that's probably because, it could come back to bite them later if they didn't. It's procedures and process. And when you look at a lot of things that happen between, things going wrong in the workplace, often it's you didn't follow procedure, you didn't follow process. So that's something that people are really, really well aware of. And that is part of, the thinking and probably the difference between a larger company or public sector environment than a small startup, for example, where you probably don't have as many of those things in place. Otherwise, they'd never get anywhere. And I think that is something you always do need to be asking yourself: which procedures? Who's this helping? And what is it really there? Is it really adding value to the business? Because we are all adults, right? We are all grown up, and we should be able to have conversations without having everything recorded. Yes.
But I do wonder, well, we'll come on to AI in a second, but of where, technology does actually create more work and more sort of side of it. But on what you talk about, teachers and teachers being attacked, etc., have you watched Adolescence?
Yes.
What did you make of it?
I found it very disturbing. In fact, I was in tears at the end of it. Because half of me thinking, because I went to a school in Liverpool that was not a very good school. So half of me going back to that and thinking, you imagine things have got a lot better now. I actually went back to my old school. It's not the same school because they knocked all the schools down in Knowsley, but it's on the same site, on the same playing fields as the old one. And it was amazing. I was so pleased. As Education Secretary, I went back. It's now a good school. For the first time ever, we have good schools in Knowsley. We haven't had them all the way through. And the kids' behaviour was, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. They were quiet. They were taking their mobile phones because they'd left them. I couldn't believe it. It was brilliant. So I'd had this sort of sense, but I think as a minister, you do get... you do get to see perhaps the improvements more than the things that are not going well, even though I asked all the time, take me to something that's failing, take me to something that's not working. And I did go to see them, but I found it deeply disturbing. And then, of course, there's the storyline itself. So one was about the school sort of environment that all the kids were in. And then there was the storyline itself, which is how much young minds can get influenced online. And how that can spill over in the real world with the usual kind of, taunting, humiliation, bullying, which is not acceptable. But I think all of us would say we saw examples of that in our childhood, right? That happens. That's what bullying literally is often. Yeah. And all of us have seen bullying or been bullied as well in our childhood. So, but how that spills over, I found deeply, deeply disturbing. And of course, you're always asking the question, what more could I have done? What more should I have done? And we did ban mobile phones in school. We put I put the guidance in place. Now they're talking about making it legislative. I don't know whether that's required or not, but the hook is there for the schools to do it. The technology is there for them to do it cheaply. But we did talk about going further and what you could do with social media. Now, we had the online harms bill, and there's all these talks and calls for banning social media, which is difficult to see how you can do that without it going completely on, under the radar. But, some countries are actually looking at that now. But there's no doubt that everybody, every parent, everybody in teaching absolutely can see the impact of social media on face-to-face relationships, and that's worrying everybody.
What do you wish you'd done as Education Secretary, or even from your whole time in politics? What's the one thing that you wish you'd had the chance to do?
All the things you didn't get to finish. So, free childcare, we were rolling that out. We did the first chunk of it. Yes. Which was 30 hours for 2-year-olds and then 15 hours for younger children. But we had a whole plan to roll that out for everybody over 9 months for free childcare, 30 hours a week free childcare, subsidised by the government. That's something I think they are continuing doing. So at least that policy hasn't been cancelled, but we were nervous that they may not. Social care, it still needs to be fixed. If we don't fix social care, if we don't fix the proposition in terms of the financial aspects of it, the workforce, which all feeds into this, then it's almost impossible to ever have a functioning NHS, because every single problem we ever had was always down to something like 85% of the patients are over 80. And normally when they're the inpatients in hospitals, and normally they're on their way to a journey where they need a bit more support to leave hospital. That could be permanent or it could just be temporary, but they need a social care package, or they need a respite home, or they need a social care, a care home. And if you don't have that part of it working, then that blocks up the hospital. And that's why we saw, 14, 15-hour ambulance queues. So all of those things, they're perennial things. People have been talking about them forever, but actually, I was in positions where I could have fixed them, and I was partway to fixing them, and then either you're moved, or in the case then the levy got scrapped, so the funding to change social care got scrapped. But for every one of them, there's so much good things that we did introduce. But to me, politics has become rather too performative. Making announcements, everybody pretending that they're the answer and nobody else can fix anything, which is wrong. Basically, the reason things don't get fixed is because they're hard to fix, and we don't have the will, often politically, because they're difficult and you have to have hard conversations. And we don't have the people who even understand how to do it, often in some of the ministers. I'm very, very worried about the complete lack of experience of implementing anything in the current, cabinet.
How do you think the job of an MP is changing on that?
Well, the job of an MP, I think, is actually becoming more and more full on, in terms of every constituent can access you. Everybody's got access to emailing you, your social media, your surgeries, when you're out and about in your constituency. So actually, from that perspective, the constituency role, I think, we'd get thousands and thousands of pieces of correspondence, on single issues. So I think from that perspective, if you go back 30 years, maybe they get 100 letters or something, So it's very much changed from that perspective. From the ministerial perspective, what's changed is two factors. The first is the type of people that go into politics. When you used to be able to have two jobs, you would very often get people who ran a business or were senior in the law or in health or whatever, but also were MPs, and they did that job in the afternoon. So you would have people who had experience always, or people who'd worked in coal mines, or people who'd worked in factories, people who were union conveners, people who had a lot of experience of actually the real world, were then coming into Parliament. And that's probably, not kept up with that kind of level. We do have more people who do come into politics very early and basically know they want to be an MP. So even if they do a job before, they're just treading water till they get the shot to be an MP. So they don't really have an awful lot of experience outside of politics, and that shows. Because what's different from politics? What is politics? Politics is someone saying, your boo sucks, you're rubbish because you're the blue team. If it was the red team, it'd be better. That's effectively what they're saying every day, in some kind of, maybe a few bits of data and facts that have been, picked deliberately to support your
far
cause.
as data and facts.
Yeah, and you can, statistics, you can use whatever you want, right? Depending on which year you're looking at. They use the waiting list. This is a great one. Waiting lists are going down every month, but they're comparing them to when the doctors were on strike. So it's like things like that. You think, well, okay, that's not. It's a use of the statistics that suits your narrative, but the reality is to actually fix things. First of all, you need to be brave enough. You need to really understand how you're going to do it, and then you need to have a plan in place. And you need long enough to do it.
I was quite struck the other day. Actually, I went through all the new Labour MPs to look at who'd got business experience and all that kind of thing, and I was quite shook at the beginning. I was like, I'm 38, right? And I was like, oh, they're younger than me. And it was like, by the end of going through the list, I was actually far more shocked by occasionally finding someone who was older. I was really struck by just how much that had kind of shifted as a sort of average age. And of course, you've got to do it partly like that. They are the new intake. They won't be that, young forever. They'll probably do it for 10 years at least. But yeah, it was. I was just kind of quite struck by it. Also, the other interesting bit on the amount of correspondence that you receive. Obviously, completely agree with that, and completely agree with the porous nature of being an MP. But I do wonder how much of the role of being a constituency member of Parliament will change with AI, because a lot of what the job is as a backbench MP is effectively being a router for constituents around government and various different levels of local government as well, because people know the MP, they write to them, and then it's often kind of directed. I do wonder how much that could potentially change with AI, like in terms of being able to do that.
Possibly, because actually what you're often doing is you're unlocking a service that they've tried to access anyway.
Yeah.
And the computer says no. Computer says no, computer says, and then they'll come and they'll, come to the MP, get a surgery and say, I'm having to homeschool my child because I cannot get the right special educational needs place. And even though we were building a lot more special educational needs places, we were not keeping up with the demand. The demand outstripped how long it took us to build the new schools. But that will get, that'll come right soon when assuming they don't cancel those programs. But that, when you've got somebody, it doesn't matter any of that, because they're really worried about getting that place. You can get the child that place. You can speak to the school. You can say, when is this? This is a real, sort of need, and of course the school wants to help as well. So it's a question of just trying to say, we'll put something in place short term in the meantime with the council, etc. All of those things, you're normally unblocking a service that people should have access to. As a minister, you think they do have access to, but then on the ground, it's not quite as it seems. And there's a lot of, computer says no, or, you don't have access, or go and speak to that person over, pillar to post, going from pillar to post. And that's actually one of the things that there's a lot of waste actually in local services through that overlap of the budget brinkmanship and people trying between local authorities, different tiers of local authorities, and also local services, the NHS and etc. So that is a factor which you could really improve. I'm hoping AI helps improve.
Well, yeah, I mean, how do you think AI will change work and skills? And what courses have you been looking at as well? Right?
Well, ethics is the ones I've been looking at, AI and ethics, because I think that's the more difficult aspect of it. Will AI make it easier to do your basic accounts or basic contracts or basic or things that are not too specific? Will there be a way of being able to get these things much, much quicker? Yes. Can it help with research? Can it do research really quickly for you? Yes.
Yeah.
Can you check some of the things you've done and some of the logic of some of the things that you have put together and look for some themes and patterns? It's even smart enough to do some of that. Yeah. Although, as I said to you the other day, I actually asked it how many Conservative MPs had a majority of over 10,000, and it came back with completely the wrong answer. So, which I don't understand, because that's numbers and facts. It's really bad. So there are certain things that basically blow your mind in terms of what it comes up with, and blow your mind in terms of how it got it so wrong. But it really is on a track to being able to be a massive, tool to help people get rid of a lot of the sort of paperwork, a lot of the research behind a lot of jobs, which will change the nature of a lot of jobs. And the big question is, what jobs then do people do with their free time? What is the does that mean that teaching becomes a more attractive profession because you are just teaching then, and AI is not going to do that instead of you, inspire that little kid in front of you who's looking up to you as though you're the only person in the world. That's a very special relationship. And I still say to everybody, no matter where you go in the world, you ask anybody, who's the teacher that made a difference to your life? And every person will answer a Mr. somebody or a Mrs. somebody. Yeah. Everybody. And that nobody will be able to do as well as the teachers. So, you do have to then get the balance of how it makes their enjoyment of their job better. That's what I really hope happens.
Yeah. And what's going to be your job of the future, right? Because you've had a career that has already been 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
And with the new working world and advancements, etc., you should probably only be 2/3 of the way through, right? Maybe not even that far. So what does the last third look like?
Well, the one thing I haven't had ever is a gap year. So I decided to treat myself to that for two reasons. The first is I haven't had the chance before. And lots of people have this around when they're 18 or perhaps when they finish university. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. There's two reasons I'm doing that. The first is I think politics is so full on, and it was such a wild ride. In 7 years, I literally went from just starting to being in the cabinet, and actually spent 4.5 years as a minister. 3 weeks after being made a minister, COVID started. I mean, it was just incredibly, fast moving. Let's just say, we're making decisions, in very difficult circumstances. So I think that's the first thing. And of course, we've also had a change of government. So you do need to kind of let politics wash away from you a little bit.
Yes.
And decompress. So that's the first thing. So I am going on holiday literally all the time. So I'm going to basically things. I've had a very international career. So, I get invited to lots of, do you want to come walk in here with me? Do you want to come here with me? Do you want to go that? And I've always had to say no, because I'd get accused of, being away. Well, that was something you couldn't do as an MP, right? You're away, and that's you're not allowed to have a holiday, even though I did, because I don't agree with that. But then also who you go with might be on a front page of something. So now I can just say yes. So I said yes to everything. After that, I want to get my Spanish back up, because I did speak pretty good Spanish, but again, haven't had any time to really focus on that. So I want to get that back up to speed. Upgrade my own understanding of AI and ethics is probably where I'll head there. And then I'm really open. It's very unusual, because usually when I was looking for new jobs, it would be, and I don't have to do anything actually if I wanted to, but I think I will, because I just feel I've got so much experience and so much and energy that I do need to do something. But usually in the business world, it would be in the sort of business space. In the political world, it would be, maybe go into a think tank and things like that. And that's not what I'm looking for, is for things where I can use all of that business experience and that political insight, because that's very differentiating. That's something that not lots of people have. I haven't worked out what that will be, but it's probably more non-exec than exec, just because I want to also value my free time, because my husband's doing his PhD. He's kind of got a bit more free time. He's still doing some board stuff, but
what's his PhD in?
It's war studies at King's College, and it's a historical naval figure that he's writing his PhD about. And then he wants to go and write a book. It's a guy called Sir Roger Keyes, who was also a Conservative a member of Parliament, and is very famous, and was there at very critical moments in our country's history, but has kind of been forgotten. So that's what he's doing his on. So as we've got a bit more time, we've worked for 80 years between us. So I want to get that balance right, to be able to, to see friends and family. I mean, our youngest lives in New York now. So we've got to get that balance right. But non-exec, I think, is probably more so than exec. But of course, everybody wants you to do exec.
Yeah. So I put this into ChatGPT.
Oh, did you? Did it come up with the answer?
Would you like to? Yeah. And also it came up with some percentages. Let me grab.
Oh wow! Okay.
Let me grab the laptop. I've been doing this a lot.
I haven't done this. I haven't thought to do this myself. Actually, it's interesting.
Yeah. So,
if it says singer, then it's wrong.
No. So I put it in with because obviously do lots of research on it now and so on, and particularly for obviously knew lots about your politics and lots of that's public, but actually the sort of business stuff it was really good on. So the corporate stateswoman hybrid, most likely 60% probability it gave this to you. Keegan leverages her crossover credentials in business and politics to land a few key non-exec directorships. Think Rolls-Royce, Pearson, or a large apprenticeship provider like Babcock.
Okay.
She's tapped to chair a new National Skills Council or something similar, possibly appointed by a future Conservative government. And then in 2030, she emerges as a go-to voice on education and workforce policy. etc., etc. And then it goes on to that. Now, the second path, 25% probability it gave this, was roll MP again. After a few years out, the party reboots. Keegan is persuaded to stand again, either in Chichester or a safer southern seat. She's still in her 50s, so could do it. So I thought that was quite interesting as well. And then the private sector queen maker, wild card, just 15% of a probability that you goes full startup and goes to found her own startup company. So don't know what you make of those.
Actually, pretty not bad.
Not bad.
And all things I've thought of myself. I've thought of starting my own business before I went down this political route. And in the end, I thought it just didn't work at my stage in life, my age. So I did invest actually in a venture capital fund, which then invested in 19 sort of very young businesses. So I kind of scratched that itch that way. I am curious and literally could go in pretty much any direction. I think I've probably proven my flexibility, my ability to move countries, to move industries, to move complete fields, and to survive, the brutal game of politics in a way. I mean, obviously I lost the seat at the last election, but I probably had a very good 7 years in as an MP and as a government minister. So yeah, I'm really open and in the meantime, having fun, but really open to what that's going to be and very excited to see what it'll be. And it could be as random as any of those things.
A few quick fires to finish off. I think you mentioned this during the interview, actually, but what was the first thing you did for money, first job?
Babysitting actually was the first thing I did for money. I mentioned my huge Catholic family. Well, I said they're Catholic, but huge family. So I had lots of cousins younger. So the very first thing was probably about the age of 11, 12, when you could then. I was babysitting my younger cousins. And then I worked as a Saturday girl in St. John's Market in a shop selling clothes and shoes.
What's the best holiday you've had in the last year?
Oh, God, I've had so many.
I've been following your Instagram.
Actually, you know what? The one that's probably surprised me the most is I went on a cruise on the Queen Mary, and I was not expecting to enjoy it because my husband wanted to go. We cruised back from New York, and we had a ball. I really enjoyed it. But, everything. I got back from Barbados last Friday. That was great.
What car do you drive?
I have a Mini, which I had from when I lived in Spain. That was my kind of when I came home car. So I've still got the same one. It's many years old, done hardly any miles, and a BMW.
Would you ever go electric?
Yes. In fact, we're looking at upgrading the Mini to electric at the right time.
Quick thanks to Octopus Energy for supporting this episode. Now, a lot of people know about Octopus for their home energy products. I have recommended people switch to them for years. But what you might not know is that they are now rolling out more products across home and businesses, from solar panels, EV chargers, heat pumps. So if you're thinking of upgrading your home or business and you are a Jimmy's Jobs listener, you can ping Jimmy at octopus.energy and get the very latest deals and insights. And if you're already on the journey with Octopus, leave us a comment or a message. I'd love to hear how it's going with their wider products. All right, back to the episode. Fine. Do you have solar panels?
No, and we have a grade 2 listed building, so I don't think it's very energy efficient, and they wouldn't allow us to have solar panels.
Fair enough. We're in the process at the moment, so that's why I'm interested. What would be a dream job? Like, if you could be the best at the world in anything, sports, astronaut.
Oh, I always loved singing and dancing. I was never any good at it. But yeah, if I could, suddenly morph into Beyonce, then yeah, I'd swap that. Strictly, yeah. I'm not sure. Although I do think Ed Balls did brilliantly. I would hope to do better than that. I mean, literally, I'm from Liverpool. I dance in nightclubs, right? So I think I could dance. But yeah, I love all of that thing. But I honestly think being education secretary was pretty much up there in being able to bring all the things you've learnt in life to try and help people to get on and have a better life and better opportunities in life. That was a really cool job.
Did you ever think or want to be Prime Minister at all?
No, and people say to me how that very few people, most people want to be Prime Minister. But there's several things. The first is I just didn't think timing's everything in life, and particularly as I got in after the Brexit debate and referendum, I just didn't think I would have enough colleagues that would back someone like me. I'm a moderate Conservative. I am never going to pretend to be anything other than what I am. And I just didn't think that I would be the right person at the right time. Other times before or after, maybe I would be the right person at the right time, but I wasn't. My time, I didn't think, they were going through a very difficult time or a very different time. So that was the first thing. But the second thing, and this is a personal thing, I hate the idea of being followed by security for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
I like being me. I like being anonymous. I like going with mates and sitting on a beach and doing whatever. I like to not be well known, really. So that's something that I think is a personal thing that I'd find difficult.
Fair enough. Now, you weren't the first and not the last to potentially tread the route from Liverpool to Real Madrid.
Ah, yes, I did. I did.
What advice would you have for a certain footballer that may be making the same trip about settling in Madrid?
I mean, I loved Madrid. You cannot not love Madrid. Madrid's a city, it takes you a little bit of time to get used to. Like Barcelona, you can kind of see what it's got to offer straight away. Madrid, it takes a bit more time. But the people, the nightlife, I mean, you're a footballer, you can't do a lot of this stuff. But, the nightlife, the dancing, all the sort of traditional Spanish things that you can do. It is a city that on every corner has got a vibrancy about it. And it's still got a lot of independent bars, independent restaurants, independent shops. And, it's still got, it's still retained a lot of its character. I love it. It's one of my favourite cities.
One of the reasons that you obviously, I started the interview by saying you particularly sort of stuck in my memory was you giving that great business speech. But then I went and looked you up as well and saw that you were from a coal mining family and a Catholic as well. So it really sort of like stuck with me. You represented the British government at the last Pope's funeral. Just talk us through what's that like. It's obviously very sort of topical with everything that's been happening.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually on holiday and it was over the Christmas and they asked, if I could represent. So the first thing I had to do was find the right outfit because I had to go to a shop and buy, all the black stuff because I didn't have that with me, which is something they always tell you as a minister and as a cabinet minister, always make sure you've got. But anyway, I hadn't followed that advice. But obviously it's a huge honour and privilege to be able to represent your country. I have been so lucky that I've been to the Vatican a couple of times. I met Pope Francis, had a private audience with him. Then I was lucky enough to go to the Pope Benedict's funeral as well. And I actually probably could have gone to this one, but I wasn't here. But there is something so special if you're Catholic about the Vatican and about the Pope, and and very much. Well, I don't know if I'll ever get to meet the new Pope, but I'm very much looking forward to see what he's going to do and how he's going to take forward his mandate. What
was the sort of sheer scale and size of it? I mean, it's one of those things that, as you were saying earlier, growing up, sort of in Liverpool, etc. Like, you must have slight pinch me sort of moment being there.
Unbelievable. I mean, from where I come from, people go to Lourdes, they go to the Vatican. My mum and her sister have just been, and they'll, be right at the back queuing with thousands and thousands of people. And there I am at the front in a seat, sitting next to the prime ministers and ministers from, all the other countries around the world. And being, literally very, very close to the Pope. So it is something that is a dream come true for most Catholics. And I also actually took a picture of my nephew who was very ill at the time to get that blessed by the Pope, and they got a picture of that, a shot. So that's a picture that we all have on our walls now. My mum and dad, and everybody has a picture of that, because luckily my nephew's now a lot better.
Oh, brilliant. Well, that's a lovely way to finish. Gillian, thanks very much for coming on Jimmy's Jobs of the Future. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.